Welcome to the Dr. Raj podcast. Today's episode features Everyday Room, a guest series hosted by Dr. Michelle Koolaee. She is a board-certified rheumatologist with a direct care practice in Pasadena, California. She trained at the University of Pennsylvania and serves as faculty and educator at Huntington Hospital, an affiliate of Cedars-Sinai. Inspired by the conversations she has with her clients every day, this series brings practical insights in rheumatology to patients and the medical community alike. And now, here's today's episode.
Hi, and welcome to Everyday Room, a guest series on the Dr. Raj podcast. This podcast is inspired by real conversations I have with patients every day. Our goal is to bring you knowledge, support, and encouragement to help you manage your rheumatology needs with confidence. Today's topic is traveling with a loved one who has disability. And I want to specifically acknowledge today the important role of caregivers. So if you're a caregiver or you love someone who is, this episode is for you. Now, caregivers, they're often the quiet backbone of chronic illness care. Many people living with chronic rheumatic diseases rely on support of a partner or family member, and that role deserves recognition. Today, I wanted to acknowledge a really great caregiver. I invited Tom to join us because he has done an extraordinary job supporting his wife, Nancy, over the years that I've known them. Now, I've cared for Nancy for several years for her bone health, even prior to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And in the last few years since the diagnosis, Tom has consistently shown up as a thoughtful, attentive, and committed caregiver. Now, many patients with rheumatic illnesses also have mobility limitations and sometimes cognitive challenges also. And as we learn in understanding Nancy's Alzheimer's. Now, recently, Tom planned and successfully completed a trip to Hawaii with Nancy, and I thought that their experience would be really valuable to share with others who wonder whether travel is still possible when disability enters the picture. So, welcome, Tom and Nancy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks for having me out.
Of course, of course. And I know Nancy is, it's a little bit early in the day when we're recording this. So she would love to be here, but I'm going to get started. And Tom, tell us a little bit about yourselves. How did you both meet, and what has your life looked together over the years?
Well, it was about 35 years ago that we first got together. We met at work, which seems to be a pretty common place to find a spouse. And she was working in my department, and I headed up an underwriting and actuarial department for group insurance broker. And we were building a new department, and we needed some organization. So Nancy had interviewed, and it was between HR and me. For where she was going to work. She interviewed me. I think she felt I needed the most help, which I did. And she joined the department, and she's really the administrative arm that kept all the trains running on time, and did an incredible job. And then after 2 or 3 years of really good friendship, it blossomed into something else. And so we were married. We've been married 30 years, and it's been, for the most part, a wonderful trip. We have 2 kids together, and I have 2 kids from a prior marriage. I say kids, but they're ranging from 28, youngest, up to 41 now. So we raised them together. We've been in the same home for essentially 30 years. Went through all the activities, the basketball, karate, softball, baseball, all the extracurricular things, and just had been a wonderful life. She has been a fantastic wife, and it's just been terrific 30 years. And just the last year or so, it's been really tough with the Alzheimer's diagnosis. But
and I think that caregiving, as we're talking about your transition to the role as a caregiver, I think that often that evolves gradually and sometimes without us even realizing it. Now, can you share how has your role changed over time, and what does a typical day look like for you now as Nancy's caregiver?
sure, formerly, even at home, she was sort of the administrative arm. So she would always take care of scheduling the doctor appointments, arguing with insurance carriers, just keeping the calendar for the family, keeping things structured and organized. And um, she was great at it. She had a absolute ability to just steamroll any opposition or
Mhm.
negativity coming from any folks that we were dealing with. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, she was starting to struggle a little bit. I noticed
Mhm.
with the memory, with keeping things organized, and so over time, I've gradually taken on that role completely. So she um, just doesn't do that at all. So
Mhm.
it's created some additional pressure. I'm still working part time. At the time,
Mhm.
I was working full time, and it was quite a bit to juggle. But we managed, and over time, it became more and more difficult for me to just care for her by myself. Uh,
Mhm.
about a year ago, started using a home health agency for a few hours a week when I would have to go into town for a meeting or go to a client meeting. She did that for a while, but it became clear that she really needed more attention, basically on a 24/7 basis. So for the last 6 months, I've had a mother-daughter fantastic team of caregivers, and the mother stays here essentially 24/7, and her daughter joins her at night. And so I have two people at night, which has been very, very helpful. And basically, they are incredibly patient, wonderful people, very concerned about my health too. So they try and make sure I get some sleep. And then they take care of Nancy's needs most of the time. But they've been a real godsend for me. And having additional caregivers to help take the load off is really critical because the pressure can build up um, on a solo basis.
Absolutely, and I think that many caregivers listening, they might feel overwhelmed trying to figure out how to get help, what help. How did you know how to navigate the system and find the supports that you currently have?
It was a stroke of luck, really. I was at one point sort of desperate for additional help. Um, Agencies are very expensive on
Mhm.
an hourly basis. And my best friend, his father in law, happened to have had a caregiver for about the last 5 years of his life.
Mhm.
And she was from the Philippines and
Mhm.
was visiting the Philippines, visiting her daughters all over the world, really. And I said, "How do do you think they'd be interested?" And it just so happened that the timing was serendipitous because they came back into town and they were looking for employment. And I got them on the phone and they came in and it was a kismet. We were a perfect match for each other. And I was very, very fortunate that that occurred. We really don't have family members close by to help. Friends would help occasionally, but it's a lot for them to bear. So having these two come in at the time they did was just unbelievably fortunate, and we were blessed to have them.
So, Tom, are they through the caregiving company, the home health agency, or this is separate?
They're just separate, just
Okay.
and
So
one of them is a nurse,
Mhm.
or qualified nurse, so medically we're good, and the other one they're just both fantastic in terms of taking care of Nancy no matter what's going on, and yeah, they allow me to do my work and just to get a break and go to the gym every once in a while and
Mhm.
just have some personal time, which is
Mhm.
really critical.
Well, and I think that's important to make sure as a caregiver too that your health comes first, and to be a good caregiver, you have to take care of yourself. It's like that analogy, putting the oxygen mask on yourself before taking care of others. I always emphasize that, and I think it's just a really nice example of making sure that you're healthy and you're exercising and you're getting space and personal time also. No, excellent, excellent, and thank you for sharing all of that. Now, so it's a they're from the Philippines, the mother-daughter?
Yes.
Okay. Did I tell you my mother-in-law is from the Philippines? So my husband's half Filipino. So they're very yeah, they're very, very, caring, warm culture. So that's and many of them are nurses. So it's nice that you have that support. No, that's wonderful. So So let's transition and talk about the travel experience. So now traveling with someone who has cognitive or mobility challenges, it takes a tremendous amount of planning, energy, and courage too. So how did you decide, Tom, on the right time to take a trip to Hawaii together? Like what went into that decision?
Well, we really like Hawaii. We tend to go about every year or every other year for the last, I'd say, 10, 12 years, hit all
Mm.
the islands, and we've had some really fond memories. We took the kids back there about 12 years ago, and it's just a place to go and relax, and we just love going there. Um, I figured this was probably the last opportunity to take uh, a nice trip like this and go see Hawaii. So my thought process was, all right, we're just going to fly to Oahu, which is the quickest flight on Southwest, and just
Mhm.
go to Oahu and go to some places that we've been before, and maybe a couple new places. I figured that might trigger some pleasant memories for Nancy, and so we visited a few areas that we'd been before, and then tried some new things. And so I thought, and it was critical. The caregivers came with us because a solo trip probably would have been extremely difficult. So the caregivers were there to help out. They'd never been to Hawaii, so it was a great opportunity just to take what's probably our last big trip together. So I figured the familiarity would be helpful.
And remind me, did you end up going to where you proposed to her?
That was the trip before. Yeah,
Oh,
we
okay.
did go to Kauai, and I went
I
up to
see.
the Princeville on the North End and revisited that. She didn't remember that, so I was a little disappointed.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
but yeah, I did like the trip. But yeah, that was the trip before.
Okay. So, for many people that have rheumatic illnesses as well, mobility and fatigue, they're major barriers to travel. And cognitive challenges, as in this case, can add another layer of complexity. How did you prepare for this trip ahead of time, both physically and logistically, Tom?
Well, it was quite a packing effort. We made sure we had all of our medications, duplicates of all of our medications. I purchased a small portable wheelchair, foldable wheelchair. It only weighed about 25 pounds, and even though
Mhm.
she can walk, her gait is slow, um, maybe a little unsteady at times. So bought this little wheelchair and brought that with us, so we were prepared. We wheeled her quite a bit at the time while we were there, and that turned out to be a good move. And
Mhm.
so I would suggest either having access to a wheelchair for someone who's having trouble walking, or um, it drains a lot of energy for them to walk. So the wheelchair was definitely very helpful. And then just packing, making sure we had a wide variety of clothes, including duplicates if need be for any potential uh, messes that could occur along the way. And so we were well prepared. And the best thing I brought were the caregivers because they were helpful,
Mhm.
extremely helpful. So also working with the airlines and TSA,
Mhm.
they were very helpful in the process as well. And I think we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a bit. But yeah, making sure to contact them in advance, making sure the pre-boarding is in place, all of those things were very, very helpful.
Now, and all of that is very helpful to know, and anyone that's considering planning this. So, when you're when there's traveling to Hawaii, there is a time difference, and jet lag can definitely play a role in making sure sleep schedule is maintained is very important. Anybody that has Alzheimer's, or anyone for that matter, I think is staying on a normal sleep schedule is important. So, how did that factor into your preparation, or did it? Just making sure, were you making sure was your goal to just stay on Hawaii time or California time, or how did that go?
Yeah, the week before, we started trying to stay up a little bit later to get used to Hawaii time. So we tried to do a pre-trip lag adjustment. We were partially successful with that, and the time difference. Once we got there, didn't seem to be a big issue. I was pleasantly surprised that
Uh-huh.
the bedtime wound up being about the same time in Hawaii, a couple hours later, but everybody adapted pretty quickly. So, yeah, trying to do some shifting before the trip was important, and it seemed to work out pretty well.
Now, did you plan the activities ahead of time? I know we'll talk about this in a moment too, but did you were you planning activities and making sure that there's things that she would be able to comfortably do, or were you, because you had the caregivers there, you would just almost kind of wing it when you were there? Like, how did the planning go?
Well, I'm a planner for
Mhm.
these types of trips, and my tendency is to fill them up with activities. So
Mhm.
I don't want any dead spots. It's like, all right, we're in Hawaii. My thought was we would be doing things that would really stimulate her, um, keep her active, and then tire her out so that she would get
Mhm.
a restful sleep.
Mhm. Mhm.
That plan might have been too ambitious.
Okay. Okay. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. So let's talk about navigating air travel. So you mentioned about TSA, about getting wheelchair assistance. Some of this can feel intimidating, or TSA Cares, which is another service that can help in travel with anyone with disabilities. So tell us more about what your experience was like navigating air travel and what helped it make it smoother.
Thank you for recommending TSA Cares. That was
Mhm.
very helpful. We flew out of Long Beach, which is a very easy airport to navigate compared to LAX or any of the others. Really, Long Beach is great because the trip or the distance from the curb to the gate to the uh, security gate than the actual gate is really short. So it was easy to navigate. But I did call TSA Cares in advance. They met Nancy at the curb. Basically, I dropped off all the luggage and the people at the curb and went to park the car. TSA came right out with a wheelchair, helped us get our bags into the checking area, and just really escorted Nancy all the way to the plane, including getting on the plane. So they were fantastic. I can't say enough about how nice they were and patient. Having to wait a couple of areas, but yeah, having them on the front end and the back end it was wonderful. Trying to get her on the plane without the wheelchair it would have been very difficult. So they were terrific. They handled it all, and front end and back end, and uh, yeah, it was a huge help to us.
So, for those that are not aware of TSA Cares, this is a service where you basically call the airport. Now, LAX, Long Beach, many airports do offer this, and you basically let them know ahead of time, this is my flight number, this is the individual that I'm traveling with and what level of support that they need. So whether it's a wheelchair, or I mentioned to you our son has autism and has cognitive disability. And so we just, when he was younger and we were able to travel, we just needed another person to help us in case he was having a hard time. And yeah, they literally will, it's just another person that comes and they help you in whatever way that makes it comfortable and easier and convenient to get to the gate. So I'm glad that you use that, and I think that it's important for people to be aware of that also. So, so the trip itself, once you arrived, what were some of the highlights of the trip for you and Nancy, and what challenges did you encounter along the way?
Okay. Well, the flight there was fantastic. Everybody fell asleep except me, and they fell asleep for about 3 or 4 hours because it was very early in the morning. So
Uh-huh.
they were well rested, and I had a lot of activities planned. The first one was to go to the Hawaiian village or the Hilton Village, where we'd been a couple times before, figuring that might trigger some pleasant memories for Nancy. So this is while we were waiting to check in. We went there for lunch, and unfortunately, right away, Nancy seemed bothered. She was stressed. She wanted to get up and walk, and she wanted to walk in opposite of where we needed to go. So we were having some difficulties there. And those old memories didn't seem to kick in where she said, oh, good, I remember this spot. It was more of a, where am I? What's going on here? And so that first lunch was the opposite of what I thought it would be. But we were able to then check in. We had a nice 2-bedroom condo. So the caregivers could stay in one area, and then Nancy actually sleeps by herself because she moves a lot at night. And so we had a nice sofa bed where she stayed, and I stayed in a separate bedroom. And she was actually pretty worn out from the activity. We just had a light dinner that night, and then just rested in the room and enjoyed the view, and did a little bit of walking along the beach. You can't do the wheelchair there, and the walking is a little slow, but we settled in, and it was great that first day, other than the lunch activity where she was a little bit frowsy. And then from there, second day, went to the Polynesian Cultural Center, which is an all-day event where you visit there. They have 6 different islands that you visit, and a little canoe ride, and then there's a buffet dinner, and then they have a show. So it was a full day activity that I thought would wear her out. I think she enjoyed it, but she was having a lot of trouble sleeping at night. There were times where she was feeling stressed and wanted to get out of the wheelchair that she was in. And so there were some battles along the way. She did sit for the show that they had and was fine doing that. But the rest of the day was a bit of a struggle to keep her focused and entertained. But overall, it was a good trip, but probably too much in terms of a full day activity, which should be something that I would caution against, depending on how the person is feeling. But having her all day basically in the wheelchair or sitting was a little bit harder than they could have been. And then from there, some sightseeing, fireworks outside the hotel, just typical Hawaiian stuff. And her sleeping wasn't great. And I think the new environment was difficult for her to comprehend. So rather than a relaxing trip, it was a little bit stressful, but still there were some really good points. The last one, if we have time, is the day I was almost arrested. And so really what happened there, we went to Pearl Harbor, and the caregivers had never been there before. And they show a movie, about a 12, 15-minute movie, prior to taking everybody out on a boat to the memorial. It was very solemn. And Nancy was having a very stressful day and was fighting being in the wheelchair. So I'd sent the caregivers off to the memorial, and I said, we'll just be here and we'll wait over here. Nancy kept wanting to get up and walk, which would have been tough because of all the monuments and tripping hazards and all. So I'm trying to get the chair. She won't put her legs on the wheelchair footrest. So we're basically battling for 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep her in her chair. And I had a ranger come up and say, folks, is everything okay? And I said, yeah, my wife has Alzheimer's, etc. And he said, well, okay, people have noticed you've been struggling and the authorities have been called. So we had 4 Navy military police meeting us at the front and separating us and getting a statement. Then Honolulu Police Department showed up, and they were looking at videotape, which they have for security purposes. And I'm sure that tape showed us struggling, her wanting to get up, me trying to keep her in the chair, and so that was difficult. And I think one of the issues there is that we were late in giving her a medication, a calming medication. And so we took it in the morning, but didn't have it with us in the afternoon. And that was a big mistake. So if there's one bit of advice I can give, it's that medication is maintained on schedule, because I think that caused a lot of angst for her. And finally, they let us go. They realized I am not a wife abuser. But it was about an hour and a half of tension where I pictured myself in the NCIS jail or something. So yeah, it was that was a difficult part of the trip for sure. But it was an amusing anecdote.
That's really stressful. So, Tom, so many things and thoughts that I have here, and we talked about this when we met in the office, but like, what was going on in your mind when you saw all these authorities and people filming, and you're just there trying to keep your wife safe?
Exactly. That's what I explained, and ultimately that it was the truth. And they looked at the videotape, and I know they saw some struggling there, but I was shocked that it got to that level to where law enforcement was called, and I think they definitely overreacted. But at the same time, I can understand why people were concerned, because it probably looked like I was manhandling her, and
Mhm.
I did let her walk for a little bit, but she immediately started making a beeline in the wrong direction,
Mhm.
trying to read this up. It was a shock for me, and I was just I was picturing myself there's going off in handcuffs, and we were flying back the next day. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think the medication management and probably the thought of keeping her busy a lot, and
Mhm.
that will tire her out and relax her and she'd sleep better. I might have overplanned on that. So I think
Mhm.
too many activities, not enough time to relax.
Mhm.
And I was just uh, very surprised that I wound up talking
Yeah.
to law enforcement. And it's funny, Nancy was talking to one of the rangers, and they have these evidence gloves, these blue gloves they use when they don't want to touch something. And he was showing her how to blow it up like a balloon. So Nancy was having a good time with the rangers, but I think they
Mhm.
realized that she um, might be difficult to control. And she's
Mhm.
still very strong and athletic, and
Mhm.
she was a very good athlete when she was younger, and she can be a handful. So I
Mhm.
think the key lesson was too many activities and keep the medication on the schedule. Mm.
Yeah, and I think such thank you for sharing that whole experience, the good and the stressful for everybody to know. The take home really is, and when planning a trip like this, I think is just managing expectations, recognizing that you can only plan so much. You know that there are going to be situations that are beyond one's control as a caregiver, and you just handled it the like, really remarkably and, like, a really very stressful, even traumatic circumstance that emphasizes, as you mentioned, importance of making sure also that you have medication, extra meds, handy, and, because it's stressful being in different environment for anybody that has, like, cognitive differences, and also, just trying to pace oneself with, again, as you mentioned, the activities. Um, so looking back now, Tom, is there anything you would do differently if you were planning the trip again? And you mentioned some of these already.
Yeah, I think probably fewer activities, more time just resting in the room and enjoying the scenery, or just watching TV and just relaxing. My expectations of her remembering the previous trips and triggering those pleasant memories, those were, I would have needed to lower my expectations, because she just wasn't able really to capture those memories. There were flashes, and those were nice to see. And on balance, I'm very glad that we went, because there were some good memories there. And but making sure that she's hydrated, snacks, medication, fewer rushed activities. I would definitely have tried to relax more and just enjoy the scenery where we were, and not plan as I planned the same way I did for previous trips, and that was
Mhm.
the whole and just flexibility. There are some days where she may not want to go, and so you can't really force it, and so it does create a situation where you have to scratch that activity off the list, because it's probably not a good idea to do it. So I could have done a better job of recognizing those things. And maybe from that Polynesian cultural center, we had to leave, should have left earlier. So there's some things I would definitely do differently. But And the flight back was very difficult because she was awake the whole time. And basically, we needed TSA to an aisle cart for restroom. And so that was much more difficult. But ultimately, we got back, we made it, and I'm glad we went. And I'd certainly would encourage people to go and just plan as activities, but be ready to change the schedule as needed.
Yeah. And so, Tom, for caregivers who are listening, and some of this, again, you did touch on, who are caring for a loved one that has a moderate to severe disability, and they're wondering, is travel even possible? What advice, reassurance, or encouragement would you want to share with them?
Definitely possible. I don't know that a 12-hour flight to Europe would be a good idea, depending on the mental ability for certain individuals. But it's certainly possible using the TSA, availing yourself of all those services, pre-boarding, make sure you have time to get the person settled, ideally close to a restroom so they do not have to walk very far on the plane. Things like that are all helpful. Planning activities, but having flexibility to cancel them, ideally without a financial commitment that you would lose. And just being flexible and knowing that there's going to be difficult situations and not being disappointed in those difficult situations. And that was something I fought a bit, which was a little depressing because there are certain activities that I just thought would be really great. And if they weren't, I'd feel some disappointment, but have to reflect back and say, it was still really worth it. We didn't do everything we wanted to do, but, and there were some issues along the way, but it was definitely worth it. And I know that she'll remember some of that trip, and it was certainly for me very valuable, and the caregivers enjoyed it too. So I would definitely suggest if need a caregiver routinely, that it really helps to have them along, that familiar face and the ability to have not just me tell Nancy what to do or difficult situations to handle those. So having a caregiver or family member, someone to support, I think is really important. But definitely doable, and I would do it again, a little differently, but I would definitely do it again.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, just as a brief sidebar, so since I do see Nancy for her osteoporosis care, I wanted to briefly stress before we close the importance of addressing bone health and anyone that has balance or mobility issues. As we all age, bone health becomes increasingly important, but it's especially important when there's mobility and balance issues and as they're changing, as they often do with Alzheimer's and other conditions. And we've talked about with Nancy a lot in our visits together about being proactive, and we've also noticed as her mobility has changed, the risks of falls increases. So addressing and being on a really good bone building treatment plan is very, very important. So just wanted to mention that she's been on a really great bone health osteoporosis treatment regimen. And so she's currently on a medication called Evenity that's building her bones and making them even stronger. So even as her mobility needs evolve, that we are remaining really proactive. And I think that's important from a rheumatologist perspective, preserving quality of life, mobility, and just making sure she's safe and not getting hurt and fractures. So just wanted to also mention that as an aside for those listeners. So in closing, Tom, thank you, and Nancy, thank you for both sharing your stories so openly. This experience, it's a reminder that caregiving is really an act of love, and that these meaningful experiences, including travel, are still possible with the right preparation and the right support. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Dr. Raj Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then please make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app and leave a rating while you're there. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. This has been a production of MedPrep2Go, and you can learn more at medprep2go.com.